Right now, we're going to kick things off. How men deal with relationships. We've been hearing a lot about domestic disputes. We've been hearing a lot about the society reaching out to women. But the issue really is the underlying issue, how men deal with relationships. Do they have that avenue in which they can express themselves? So joining me on set right now is counseling psychologist in the private sector, Dr. Crystal Jane Veerasamy. Welcome.
Hi, morning. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you this morning. Also, I understand that Rondell Fields should be joining us. I'm not too sure. Okay, he is on the line. Good morning, Mr. Fields, president of the Single Fathers Association. Sorry to wake you up this early. How are you doing?
Morning. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So we saw your article in the newspaper where you spoke about men having to vent in the bars and at the various barbering shops, etc. So we'd like to discuss this morning. Joining us on set, I said earlier, is Dr. Crystal Jane Veerasamy, and she's a counseling psychologist, and she deals with this sort of issue. So my first question would be, where we've been seeing a lot of cases where murder, suicides have been arising from domestic issues. So the question is, what does this really say about the mental health of our men in society? So this question is for Dr. Veerasamy.
I think it shows a lot that, based on the incident that happened recently, that definitely indeed men are vulnerable to mental health issues. More so, they're quite particularly susceptible to particular mental health issues. So for instance, they're quite prone to substance abuse disorders, depression, suicide. And sometimes it goes a bit undiagnosed, where they're also their personality disorders, and they're also childhood relational trauma, unresolved issues that hasn't been resolved.
Mr. Fields, how do you feel about those? I mean, we've had a mouthful: substance abuse, depression, personal issues, childhood issues. Are these things that you're aware of?
Yes, definitely. And I mean, firstly, even before delving into that, I would say I think we have a greater societal problem where, I mean, as the doctor rightfully highlighted, a number of mental health issues that men may be susceptible to. I think society doesn't even recognize that men are susceptible to certain mental health issues. I think when men go through mental health issues, people think we're talking about insanity only. Insanity, or it's a madman, so to speak. Whereas we have found, the society has rightfully found appreciation for a lot of mental health issues that a lot of women suffer from, like postpartum depression and stuff like this. I mean, a lot of people don't even appreciate that men suffer from postnatal depression as well, or separation from their children, or some of the other things, mental health issues, and I mean, serious depression, as the doctor would have highlighted. So I think it's also a societal problem as well, where we don't, in other words, understand that men can suffer from various forms of mental health issues that would lead them to do things they may not believe they may have done. It's not always the perspective, or the perspective is always offered up is that it's either a violent man or it's an angry man who's been angry his entire life. But sometimes that is all I was suggesting. It's not always that perspective that should be offered. There should be further investigation into seeing if there was some serious mental health issue, or if men are being pushed into certain scenarios that cause these issues to arise in their life, and really try to get to the root cause, a more proactive approach opposed to the reactive approach that we have right now.
That's an excellent point, Mr. Fields. Crystal, tell me about this particular aspect of it. Is society aware that men are susceptible to these particular ills, or is it that we always say that they're violent and they're just angry?
Yeah, I think it manifests itself as anger. So even in my own practice, a lot of times people, when they come for therapy, they ask for anger management. And then when you explore it a lot deeper, you realize that it's a lot more about interpersonal relationships. And sometimes you even notice that it's a lot to do with childhood relational trauma, a lot of unresolved issues from childhood in terms of how they were parented, or if there was abuse in some way. So a lot of men that I've worked with, I'm not saying all, but sometimes there's a history of child sexual abuse, which is something that they don't really talk about, but it manifests itself as anger.
That is interesting. Men, and Mr. Fields, I'll ask you to weigh in on this. We always hear that men have an issue in terms of venting. They're not really open to speaking about issues. Do you think that is true?
Of course it is. I mean, we've been bred a particular way. I mean, some people will call it patriarchy, but I mean, tradition. I don't put these fancy labels on these things. It's just it's a traditional pattern of how we've trained our boys to be and how we've trained our girls to be. We've trained our boys, they fall, don't cry. We've trained our boys to be strong, which is also good training, but at the end of the day, we've never given them an avenue to let them know, here what. There are times that you're going to have to be sad, you're going to mourn, you're going to be hurting, you're going to have to express, you're going to need help from your partner, you're going to need help from your friends, your colleagues. It's okay if you trust someone to confide in them. I mean, we as women, I mean, traditionally have supported each other, have gone for help, gone for assistance. I've always been able to ask for help without ever being ridiculed, without ever being belittled or ever looked or belittled. So it's also it's traditionally something, and it's culturally something that we've embedded from boyhood into boys, that at the end of the day, you must be strong, you must be a protector, which I say are valuable traits as well. But at the end of the day, we also teach our boys don't be violent. But we also never tell them we never teach them to look out for violence coming towards them, even from the other gender as well. So I think it's a balancing on both sides. Just as we have learned now that we must also empower women to achieve their fullest capability, because they are just as capable as men in many regards. We now have to change the discourse or change the language that we use when we come to men dealing with emotional situation, men being expressive about things that bother them, men being able to be free to talk, feel free to talk. We have to create the spaces to do it and not ridicule them. I mean, we've seen men do that, and sometimes men, or not even men, sometimes when we've advocated in spaces, lamenting or highlighting issues that some men are emotionally susceptible to, some men are emotionally affected by. Sometimes we've had government organizations, or we've had other NGOs not even show sympathy for the things we've been lamenting, or not even willing to give up listening or hearing or show compassion towards it. So societally, we have created a place that does not, facilitate or make the space for men to vent and get their issues out. So you just loading cannons all over the place where there's no way, and that's why I said most of the times men find this place when they sit amongst other men, when they are at the bar. Sometimes when they're at the barbershop, primarily though, when they are at the bar. And that is the truth of it. There's no space, there's no area, and that is why I said we, through the European Union funding, was so important for us to inform some collaboration where we could create some alternative, some space with positive alternative message in the communal area, in the communities itself.
And Dr. Veerasamy, I see you nodding.
Yeah,
I'm sensing that you're agreeing with what he's saying.
I think that Mr. Fields raised a valid point in the sense that the way how we're socialized, so for instance, the way how men are socialized, they are socialized to take on this traditional masculine gendered role. And a lot of time the question is, okay, well, what is masculinity and what does that mean for a person, more so a man? What does that mean to be masculine? And most times they attribute it to characteristics such as not showing signs of weakness, or not showing a level of vulnerability, or any signs of being feminine is considered bad or not masculine. So if it is, research shows that if men adhere to these socialized masculine gender roles, then they're less likely to seek help. However, if it is that there's less adherence to these masculine roles, they're more likely to seek help. So the question is more about not necessarily if there's avenues for support, but it's more about recognizing, okay, well, what does it mean to seek help? What does it look like to seek help? And who would I be if I was to seek help? What does this mean that I'm a weak person? What does it mean that I'm not masculine enough if I was to ask someone for help? And I think what Mr. Fields was also raising is that men are raised in a way where expressing emotions is shown as a sign of weakness. And it's really about, that's where parenting programs come in terms of having equality, in terms that everyone is allowed to express their emotions, both men and women. And even when I work with men, sometimes I realize that they don't have an emotional vocabulary. So they can speak about anger, but they may not be able to speak about sadness or hurt or pain or loss. And these are very deep and painful issues. And sometimes I've noticed that even when they develop a vocabulary, an emotional vocabulary, they may not know how to cope with these emotions. So it's a lot more, I think it's a deep psychological process that men go through, even if they were to seek help. And I guess that's why it's quite easy for them to go into bars and probably express themselves. But it's really about sensitizing that is okay. That is really okay to express how you're feeling. That is okay to feel pain. It's okay to feel loss and to talk about it.
Wow. Mr. Fields, are you hearing this? Parenting programs, emotional vocabulary, men having issues with expressing sadness, pain, and loss. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, all brilliant initiatives, all brilliant points. And I mean, and as you rightly said, desensitization. Because desensitization, and I believe sensitization even has to go beyond sensitizing the public. It has to go as far as sensitizing other advocates as well. I believe it has to go into sensitizing, and I mean, letting the messages go to certain ministries that have some of these programs as well, so that you also having the program is just but one thing. You need to make sure when you put out a program, it is something that it is attractive to a man as well. So you attract them to the program, so that the program just isn't a program, and then no one attends. So it's about full sensitization and some of the things that men go through. Some of the greatest people to be a part of the sensitization would be definitely men. Men who have gone through the experience, men who are currently going through the experience as well. So they have an idea based on their experience, what they've been through. And they have the little signs, they have the little indicators, knowing when other men are going through it. And I mean, they have the solution, and they're getting men into these programs as well. So I think sometimes, and there are a lot of programs, mediation services, maybe able community development may speak that they have for men, and they have programs in the Ministry of Gender, and they have programs everywhere. But the thing is, I think what we need to do is also make it more attractive to men, so that men will understand, well, all right, this is a free space, this is a safe place, this is a place that I can trust, because you're talking about this is something new. So, I mean, if a man's whole life, he's taught that, even if he's, look, I dealt with a father, I was at cricket just yesterday, and his mom died, and he would not show emotion in any form or fashion, because he thought that's the stronger thing to do. I prepped myself long time, so I know this going to happen. Whereas I know to myself, anytime he catch himself alone, and the thoughts and the memories of his mother mothering him, he's going to break down. So, I mean, it because he did, and she died while he was at the cricket game. But he thought, in other words, for people to see him be emotional might be something bad. So I think it's also the sensitization of those who advocate, because sometimes they are at the level of advocacy, sometimes the programs that we have in existence, I mean, they don't come across as attractive to men, to have men involved, or to even have men listen. To sensitize, we must be able to hit the target. A lot of men would listen to what I have to say because I know how to say it, when to say it, because I am a man. And I'm a man that went through certain things as well. I'm not saying women cannot assist and women cannot be a part, and women have been very instrumental in a lot of the benefits that men have today. But just as a man, many of the time can't hit home every single time with a woman. We need to have more men involved as well. We need to make things more attractive to men, so that when we have these programs rolled out, men say, hey, you see these fellas, I could go to them for help. And that's one of the reasons, that's one of the things we've been able to be successful at that Single Fathers Association. That's why our phones don't stop ringing. That's why people always seem to reach out to us. They're never afraid to show emotion when it comes to us. They're never afraid. And that's because of the way they hear us speak. That's because of the things they see us advocate for. And that's because the manner in which they see we advocate.
So we're looking at solutions. In our closing 2 minutes, how do we begin to attract men to these sorts of institutions, or to engage in these types of conversations where they can develop their emotional vocabulary, as you said?
Yeah. I think one of the things is that in Mr. Fields' article, he wrote about community approaches, and I do definitely agree with that, in the sense that I think it first starts in communities, because that's where men already have their niche. They're connected to people in their community. And if it is that you go into communities, for instance, using community-based centers, it's about sensitizing and educating in terms of you through workshops or screening days, clinical presentations, in terms of educating what mental health is and that men could experience mental health. So in a way, it's starting that conversation that men are susceptible to mental health issues, and creating that space where they can begin to talk about it, having support groups. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Veerasamy. Your closing comments, Mr. Fields?
I mean, I must say, it's a breath of fresh air. I must commend Dr. Veerasamy for the approach she's taken. I mean, she's definitely on the ball, and I am a very critical person. I don't say that all the time. So, I mean, I must encourage men also to get involved as well. People can't just be putting things in place for you. You must, in other words, make yourself available, show that interest. We from the Single Fathers Association definitely will be putting things out there to try to get men more involved, get women involved as well, as we try to really, eliminate violence in the domestic relationship as best as possible.
Thank you so much. And even the directors are telling me that we need to bring back Dr. Veerasamy. Dr. Veerasamy and Mr. Fields, thank you so much. We really appreciate this discussion.